All right. Okay, so let's begin. Hello and welcome to the 159th meeting of the Kamwo Meetup Group. My name is Hayang Lau, and I am the Community Engagement Manager at Kamwo and the host for tonight's event. As always, we aim to provide you with an enjoyable and informative experience in the world of Chinese medicine. The core mission of our meetup group is to connect our members with esteemed authorities in our circle so we can learn from each other and ultimately uplift the entire profession. If you want to know more info about events similar to this, there is a private Facebook group named Kamwo Meetup that's exclusively for Chinese medicine practitioners. We encourage you to join the group if you haven't yet to stay up to date on our upcoming events. For those who are joining us for the first time, just so you know, as a special thank you for attending tonight's event, each of you will receive an email containing a coupon that's $20 that can be applied to Kamwo's eScript online store. So you should expect to receive an email from me early next week, including all the info I just stated, with as well, and also a recording of tonight's lecture as well. So if you don't see the email for any reason, please check your spam folder or email me at hayang@kamwo.com and we'll get that taken care of for you. The talk tonight is expected to last approximately an hour and a half. This will include the lecture and a Q&A session, and we expect to conclude around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So before we begin, I would like to share a few ground rules. Please keep your mic on mute to minimize background noise and hold off on any questions until our guest speaker is ready. Stephen does welcome an interactive session during the lecture, so feel free to type any relevant comments and I'll make sure that we get these questions and comments to him when it's appropriate. So, all right, so enough of the rules. I'd like to give a short introduction of our esteemed guest speaker for tonight, Stephen Bonzak. So Stephen has his hands on a lot of different programs in Chicago. He is the founder and director of Health Traditions Acupuncture and Herbal Medicine Clinic. He's also the chair of the Oriental Medicine Department at PCOM Chicago and director of ICEAM Chicago. And for those who are not familiar with ICEAM, do not think ice cream, but rather Institute of Classics in East Asian Medicine. Stephen has trained under Dr. Arnaud Versluys since late 2008 and completed his DCCM in 2011. During those years, he was fortunate to meet and attend seminars with Dr. Zeng Rongxiu on a number of occasions. Stephen teaches both domestically and internationally alongside Dr. Versluys as a co-instructor. He was one of the first practitioners to become clinically certified as a fellow of ICEAM and is one of the 3 clinical supervisors currently approved by Dr. Versluys. So Kamwo is very excited to have Stephen here tonight with his deep knowledge in the classics of Chinese medicine, and we are looking forward to what he has to say about the beloved herb Gui Zhi. So I'm going to give this off to Jasmine, and she'll talk a little bit too.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some faces from last week's webinar back again. My name is Jasmine Stein. I'm an acupuncturist licensed here in New York State, and I also manage outreach for the Diploma of Canonical Chinese Medicine program, which is ICEAM's 2-year flagship diploma training program. And every so often, every few years, we open up registration for that program, which is one of the most thorough, complete, and systematic herbal training courses available in the United States. We also offer it in Europe. And when we do that, we like to offer people a chance to get a taste of what the canonical herbal style is like, a style based in the Shanghan Lun and the Jingui Yaolei. And what is so unique about this particular lineage, the lineage in which Dr. Arnaud Versluys is currently the head of, as Hayang was saying. So these webinars are like our way of kind of inviting you into the way that we do things and why we think that this lineage and this style is so awesome. And we really hope that it's of benefit to you in your practice and your journey to become a better herbalist. I'll drop some links in the chat having to do with ICEAM and the program in case you want to learn more. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our little short little lecture here, introduction to kind of thinking a little bit about dosages and dosages of Gui Zhi cinnamon twig. And like Hyung was saying, like I'm very open to like questions as we go along. I kind of prefer a little bit more of a question and answer, kind of like all the way through. I mean, obviously, I'll present some material, and then as you guys are kind of thinking about it, if you have questions, oftentimes like the questions and the sidetracks that we get on kind of give us the best insights to like the topic at hand. So I definitely am open to that. So please, by all means, don't hesitate to ask questions. I guess before we get started though, and before I kind of get into a little bit of why canonical medicine, what is canonical medicine, that kind of thing. I'm just kind of curious as to like how many people is everybody here like practitioners already, or this kind of mix of students and practitioners? Maybe just like type it in the chat box so I can just get an idea of like what we got going on here. All right. Oh, practitioner, 3 practitioners in a row so far. All right. And as people are kind of typing that in, like, is everybody practicing herbal medicine? People practice herbal medicine kind of as a, composing your own formulas, or people using patents? Hey, Tracy. And what kind of style of herbal medicine are people using in general in their practice? Are people using patent medicines, tea pills, granulated formulas, decoctions? Okay, like granules seems like some patents. All right, good. Well, I kind of would expect that if you guys are coming to a Kamwo lecture here. You guys are on the list for a reason. I remember when Tom came to Chicago way back in the day. I think I had just been teaching for a couple of years, and it was kind of a funny little lecture. He was giving lectures about like herbal medicine and like how to use herbs and stuff like that. And one of the things that we were talking about, like, and as teachers, we were trying to kind of impress this upon students. Because at that point, we weren't really using granules in the schools back in the old days. We just only had the tea pills versus the bulk herbs that you can make, boil up decoctions and whatnot. And, so many of the students were reluctant to give the bulk herbs, because it was like, hard to remember all the herbs and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But also they were kind of complaining that, patients were not like compliant. I remember Tom saying, Tom, the director over at Kamwo, was saying that, really, if you want to be a professional herbal medicine practitioner, you should never give patent medicines, and we're like, why, Tom? Why shouldn't you do that? And he's like, because the dose on the bottle, right, is not enough to kill a cat, meaning that like, patent medicines really just don't do anything. And that like, it's not really worth the time of the patient or the practitioner to be doing that. And certainly you can't control the dosage of anything. You can't customize formulas when you're using patents. So I'm glad to see that everybody here is using mostly either raw or granules, so you can kind of compose your own formulas and get patients on something that's really truly customized for them. That's great. Good. Well, so then, all practitioners, I don't think I saw anybody that was a student. It looks like everybody pretty much is practicing, with either granules or bulk, and that's awesome. And so, today's lecture with the racy title, size does matter. We're not talking about anything to do with anything inappropriate here. We're just purely talking about cinnamon twig. We are not going to have any blue humor here at all tonight. So, but talking about dosage and dosing schemes is incredibly important. As I've kind of progressed in my career, studying herbal medicine, practicing herbal medicine, teaching herbal medicine, one of the things, it's incredibly important. And so often, early on in my career, formulas that probably were the right formula for a patient often didn't work, not just because they weren't getting, let's say, the right dose on a daily kind of basis. So granules, I typically prescribe like about 16 grams of granule a day, depending on like the formula, of course, but usually about 16 grams. But the point of kind of getting the right dosage of individual ingredients. Certainly one of the early cases I remember, actually there's a number of them, but one of the early cases I remember was giving a woman a formula for, she was having tachycardia. And giving her a formula, Gui Zhi-based formula for tachycardia, and having very kind of sort of okay. It wasn't like quite working the way it should, and it's because I was now that I can look back on that mistake, and it was because I was way underdosing cinnamon in that case. learning how to dose cinnamon correctly for people with having serious heart conditions like AFib, tachycardia, all sorts of arrhythmias and stuff like that. If you don't get the right dose of the ingredient to them, even though it may be the right formula, it won't do what it's supposed to do. It just won't work. And so dosage is really important for cinnamon. Obviously, that's what we're talking about today. But dosing is also incredibly important for all the medicinals that we're using. And being able to control the dose, being able to adjust dose for different patients is going to be, so important for getting the job done that we want to get done. All right. So then today's lecture, then we're going to kind of just do a quick introduction of, what is canonical medicine. In general, like how do we think about canonical medicine? We kind of, Dr. Versluys kind of chose that title on purpose for like the institute and the program, the training program. Instead of choosing, let's say, for instance, the term classical Chinese medicine, canonical Chinese medicine kind of means something in particular, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then talk a little bit about like the Tianzeng lineage and like why that's kind of special, different, unique in terms of the field of Chinese medicine. And then for the meat of the lecture, we'll kind of have like 3 main points for us to talk about today. I kind of have a feeling the first point is going to be a little bit moot since most people are practicing this way, but Chinese herbal medicine is cooking, which means we're all making soups. We're soup doctors. We're making food for our patients. That's the premier way to kind of prescribe medicine to patients. It's the most important way to administer herbal medicine to patients and get the best results. And because it's food, right, then for sure, then the second bullet will make sense, is that like, well, how does your soup taste? Like, are you a good cook or are you a bad cook, right? Are you controlling how much salt you're putting in your soup, or are you not controlling how much salt you put in your soup? Because that will make a difference in how your soup tastes. And in Chinese medicine, the flavor is everything. Without appropriate kinds of flavor control in your decoctions, then you're not going to get the results that you want. And flavors are important both in the sense like we'll talk about today in terms of like dosing. So kind of, turning up like the amount of spicy in your formula or turning down the amount of spicy in your formula, like that's going to be important. Also flavor combinations will be important in decoctions. That's not going to be part of the lecture tonight. But certainly that's also something to kind of consider as you're kind of looking, to improve your ability to kind of work with patients, looking at like how you control flavor, and then thinking a little bit then of like, what are those flavors doing? How are those flavors affecting my patients? And what can I do if I'm making a mistake, if something's not working? One of the first thoughts that we all should have is that like changing the intensity of a certain flavor could easily make or break the prescription that you're given. Okay. Any questions about the program for this evening, or kind of already have kind of questions about something in general? I know we haven't started exactly just yet, but I'm always open to questions. So if you have any kind of questions, I'd be happy to answer it. I know there's always a little time lag from me saying that to like people can kind of furiously type on their computer to get that question. So don't worry about it if I go ahead and your question, you're still working on your question. You can keep typing. All right. So then the first thing we need to just talk about a little bit, which, if you were here last week or if you've kind of poked around like our website on the internet, you kind of have seen, this phrase canonical Chinese medicine. It's an important concept, and we want to kind of get a little bit of an idea what that means. And that'll help kind of get a feel for like how we kind of do things in our particular school of Chinese medicine. One of the sayings I always loved early on when I started taking classes with Arnaud was, this old Chinese idiom, when drinking water, remember the source. And this is obviously talking about like kind of like a river. It's a river analogy, right? If you want to get the freshest water, where do you get it? You get it up in the spring, right? Way up in the top of the mountain where that water's first kind of like, coming out and then starting to go down like a river and making its way to like the sea or the ocean. Drinking from there is going to be the best water, right? That's the freshest water. And this is a important kind of concept in terms of when we think about canonical Chinese medicine in the sense of where do we get the freshest water? We get the freshest water from the source of our medicine, which is the canon, right? Which is the, the text, the Wang Di Neijing, the Nanjing, the Shenghen Lun, the Jingui Yaolei, books that we have like parts of, like the Tang Ye Jing, or things that we have various kinds of copies of. These are the important texts in Chinese medicine. And so these are also like, then we would consider this to be the source, right? This is where we're looking towards. It's also a methodology. One of the things that you'll probably hear me talk, I'm always kind of talking like this, but like one of the things you'll hear me talk today, and if we ever talk in the future, is like method is really important in clinic. Having a system, having a way you work through is really going to be important, because if you don't have a method, right, it's very easy to get caught up in your own ideas. This is one of the reasons why when I started studying with Dr. Versluys, that I started studying with him, is because I was dying for a method. I mean, those of you that kind of went through your regular TCM training, you kind of remember, like, you memorize a bunch of stuff and then you kind of don't have to worry about it anymore because you memorize it, but then someone doesn't use it, or they're like, forget about that. You don't need to know the 5 phases, or whatever it is. Like when you're kind of going through school, you get all these like scraps of pieces of information, and then you get into clinic and you're just somehow supposed to like make it all happen. Without even really having any kind of rhyme or reason why you're doing what you're doing. You're just kind of like, I guess it's spleen chi vacuity, right? You kind of give them some formula. Why that formula? Well, I don't know. It seems to kind of match. And you kind of like, give it to a patient and, kind of do the sign of the cross and hope for the best, right? And so having a method, though, kind of alleviates a lot of those problems. Because when you have a method, you have like, a protocol. You have like steps that you can go through. You have a way, like Zeng Rongxiu will talk about in the introduction to his text. You have a way to think through the problems, right? So somebody comes in with something either you've seen before or not seen before. You have a way to think through it. And then you have a way to think through it. But then if something happens that wasn't supposed to happen, like you gave them some formula, like we'll see in one of the cases I have today, you gave them a formula and, whoa, that didn't really work. Then you can kind of go back and think through why that didn't work, and then make adjustments on what you're doing, again, based on a methodical way of going through things in your practice. And so there's a method that we have in ICEAM for our clinical work. There's also a method that we have in terms of, what do we study? How do we prioritize what we want to study? And one of those important methods, this comes from this idiom. Again, like, when drinking water, remember the source. This is why we look to like the way the Chinese would kind of characterize as like high antiquity. Why do we look back in time for what we want to do? Why don't we look at like what's going on now? What's the cutting edge research, right? In Western medicine, like nobody looks at any reference that's more than 5 years old. Like that's ancient history in Western medicine, because their methodology is to look forward. Right? In Western medicine, we always are looking forward. We're looking for the cutting edge. We're trying to get ahead, right? We're looking at, and then other methodologies like looking at like material structures and stuff like that. That's the methodology of Western medicine. But the methodology of Chinese medicine is to look back to your ancestors, right? Again, where do we get the freshest source? Where do we get like the deepest knowledge? We get it from high antiquity. We get it back from the Han Dynasty. Right? So when we talk about canonical Chinese medicine, we're talking about particularly the canon books, which are coming from the Han Dynasty. Things that come after that are interesting. They may be books that you want to read and kind of think about, but ultimately, whatever we're doing, we want to be secure in our knowledge of like the canon, of like, what does the Neijing say? What does the Shenlong Bensa Jing say? What does Jiang Dongjing say in his text, the Shenghen Lun and Jingui Yaolei? Those are going to be the things that really kind of be most reliable for us in clinic, right? And so then that's our study methodology. When we're talking about canonical Chinese medicine, we're talking about like, this is where we find our information. I remember, again, like kind of way back in the day when Dr. Zeng was still alive, Arnaud was running a series of seminars. It was like basically a way to get his teacher to kind of share some of his knowledge. So we had like these Dr. Zeng weekends, basically. And we had a bunch of people present, and Dr. Zeng would present on some of the stuff from his life. And in one of those weekends, we always get swag when we go to these things, right? Like you get a mug, you get a whatever. And so that year's swag was, I don't know if you remember, I guess he's not really kind of somebody we want to remember anymore, but like Lance Armstrong used to have those Live Strong bracelets, right? You remember those like rubber bracelets? I don't know, maybe like everyone's not old enough like me to remember those bracelets, but, and so Arnaud that year made those bracelets, but he made it instead of, he kind of mixed two metaphors up. Instead of putting on Live Strong, right? That was like the thing that you had on those bracelets. He put on the bracelets WWZZJD, right? You know, a play off of what would Jesus do, but instead of what would Zhang Zhongjing do, right? And it was kind of funny, and everyone get a laugh. But you know, it was an important reminder for all of us, because like that's kind of like what we're trying to be doing, right? We're trying to get in the mindset of like the ancestors. We want to think like they thought back in the Han Dynasty. We want to think like Zhang Zhongjing thought. So when we look at a case coming into us into practice, yeah, you know, yeah, okay, you've got like testicular cancer. Yeah, okay, you've got like these labs. Yeah, okay, whatever. Like we want to reframe everything in terms of yin yang, 5 phase, and 6 qi. Whatever's going on. If I'm going to choose an herb, I don't choose an herb because it's anti-cancer. I choose an herb because this person's got some sort of 5 phase problem going on, and I felt it in his pulses, and that told me I needed to give him, for instance, like Li Zhongwan or something like that. And you may look at a formula like that and go like, that's not a cancer formula. What are you talking about? You can't give that to your patient, right? But if it matches their pulses, right? If it fits with the pattern that they've got, the imbalance of yin yang, 5 phase, 6 qi, that is going to be the exact formula that's going to be able to get them to the health that they need, if it's at all possible, right? And that's one of the famous cases. That's one of Dr. Zeng's famous cases. A guy with incurable testicular cancer came to him in his clinic, and he felt his pulse. He didn't really even know he had testicular cancer, I think, at the time, but the guy just had some swelling in his legs, and he was like, you know, I'm going to die in 3 months. You know, I might as well feel comfortable. And so Dr. Zeng felt his pulses, wrote Li Zhongwan, and that guy just kept filling Li Zhongwan for a year and a half, and he wasn't dead yet. And so then he went back to the hospital to get checked out, and he had cured his testicular cancer with Li Zhongwan, right? And that's not to say that Li Zhongwan is the testicular cancer formula. No, that is that guy's testicular cancer formula, because that was his pulse, and that was his presentation, and that was his imbalance of yin yang, 5 phase, 6 qi, right? So again, what is canonical Chinese medicine? It's a methodology. What do? We're trying to read these books so that we can start to think like they thought back in the Han Dynasty. Kind of an impossible project, I know, but we're doing our best to think like they thought back in the Han Dynasty, so that when people come into our practice, we're then going to see them through the eyes of Zhang Zhongjing, hopefully, right? And we're going to be able to kind of recognize those patterns via the pulses, via the symptoms that they're giving us, and write very accurate prescriptions based on that. Right. And so our methodology then also is that, well, we are kind of revering the canon. We're kind of always like kind of going back and thinking about, you know, what's going on with like the, you know, the Wang Di Neijing. What does this paragraph say? Another couple of things that we kind of have, the way we think about things is, one, we don't get into the game of, well, that must be a misprint, right? It couldn't possibly mean that, right? That's wrong. That must be a typo. And one of the reasons we don't do that is because, like, once you start doing that, your own mind starts to get in the way of like the project that we have, right? The project that we have is trying to really understand, and it may seem cryptic at the time, but like we really want to understand what's going on, so that then we can learn more about like what they were thinking back in the Han Dynasty. Right. So again, a good example, I was actually one of those Dr. Zeng conferences. I was giving a lecture on running piglets disease, running piglet disease. And, you know, I had gathered together all these resources, whatever, and, you know, was doing my lecture. And at the end, I was presenting a case, and I was presenting a case of the formula Bentontong, right? Running piglet decoction, which is from the Jingui. It's Dangui, Baishao, Chuanchong formula for like a surge up, causing anxiety and stuff like that. And the woman was also having, at that time, that was her problem. And then she was also having, so she was anxious, but she was also having some rib side pain. And so I modified the formula in that case using Chuanlianzi, right? Because you learn in TCM school, Chuanlianzi regulates the liver qi, right? It's good for pain, right? So I added Chuanlianzi to the formula. And I remember after the lecture, you know, Arnaud, you know, we were talking a little bit, and he's like, oh, it's a good case, you know, like, you know, but did you ever think about Mu Li? Like, Mu Li, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, Mu Li, look it up, like the Xiao Chai Hutang line, right? So I'm like, okay, I go look it up. And in the Xiao Chai Hutang line, right, it's like, well, for glomus under the rib side, in other words, like for pain underneath the rib side, right, that's kind of intractable, take out the dots out from Xiao Chai Hutang, take out the dots out and add Mu Li. right? You know, and as a practitioner, especially as a relatively new practitioner back then from TCM school, like that makes no sense whatsoever, right? Mu Li for ribside pain, say what? Right? But that's because I wasn't trained when I was in school to think like they thought back in the Han Dynasty, right? But that modification is encoding a thought process. And John Jing is very serious that that's the way you fix like that kind of ribside pain. And so if I want to understand like how to kind of think about these formulas, use these formulas and get good results through these formulas, I have to kind of figure out what's going on. I can't just say, oh, like, oh, crazy John Jing. He just didn't know what we know now. He would have had Shang Fu if he just was a little bit more modern. That's not a very good methodology, right? Because then you're just going to do whatever you want to do. You've got no method anymore, right? So our method is let's figure out what John Jing means. So then going through and thinking about it and researching. So again, like what that's telling us, just as like a little side here, is saying that like that ribside pain is got to be because the Sanjiao, right? So Chai Hu Tongs treat Shaoyang pathology. Shaoyang pathology has to do, yes, with the gallbladder, but also with the Sanjiao. The qi and fluids are what descend down through your Sanjiao, right? So yuan qi and fluids go through the Sanjiao. And so when we're using Chai Hu formulas, say like Xiao Chai Hu Tong, obviously Chai Hu is working like the qi, right? The gases that are going through our Sanjiao, right? And John Jing is saying, well, if you gave Xiao Chai Hu Tong and that's not enough for that ribside pain, guess what? It's not a qi problem. So what must it be? It must be a fluid problem, right? And so then you still may be going, oh, like Mu Li, well, that's because salty, Mu Li is salty. Salt reduces water, again, according to the Neijing in chapter 22. Salty purges water, breaks up an accumulation. So John Jing seeing if that accumulation under your rib isn't qi-based, then it's got to be fluid-based. And what flavor do we use for fluid-based obstructions but salty? And so what herb should you use? A salty herb like Mu Li, right? And that salty Mu Li then will reduce that kind of accumulation in the Sanjiao and therefore break up that sensation underneath your rib side. And that will resolve your ribside pain, right? And so since learning that, now I use that all the time, right? And it's a very effective way of treating ribside pain, right? Mu Li is one of the premier ways. I mean, again, if you're kind of seeing something that's not particularly like qi-based, if it's a little bit more fluid-based, then using Mu Li works great, right? So our methodology then is one, yes, we revere the classics, right? The canon, right? We revere the canon not just because we're some crazy, you know, kind of like sinophiles or something like that. We do it because this is our methodology, right? We're trying to understand the way they were thinking back then because that is the source, right, of our medicine. And so I understand the canon so I can understand the source of the medicine. And then I understand the source of the medicine so I can think like they're thinking in clinic so I can work out problems based on that methodology. Right? Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Right? You know, and so it's not like some sort of just like we're just crazy people. We just walk around in old like, you know, Hanfu kinds of clothes and we like to play with swords. No, that's not like our, well, I mean, it's kind of fun to play with swords, but like that's not why we do it. We're doing it because we want to have a way to address problems in clinic that's a systematic way. And quite frankly, for me, like what I want is I see my teacher, my grand teacher, my great grand teacher, the kinds of things that they could fix with their herbal medicine. And I'm like, man, I've never been able to do that on my own. I want to work like that. I want to solve those problems. Well, let me do it the way they were doing it. Right. And that's thinking through problems based on like the canon. You know, in terms of the canon, then like, you know, there's like several different lineages as far as like the canonical Chinese medicine goes. There's the Fuxi lineage, Shenrong lineage, and the Wangdi lineage. Now, again, there's a little bit of longer lecture based on this stuff, but basically this is the way the Chinese look at their ancient ancestors. They look at Fuxi as being like the wood emperor. They look at Shenrong as being the fire emperor. They look at Wangdi, obviously because he's earth, Wangdi, as being the earth emperor. And then there's no mention in any books of like the metal and the water emperor because those would be the degenerate times, right? Remember, we look to high antiquity as being the best. And so once you get too far away from high antiquity, like they're just nobodies after that, right? So we don't worry about following them. So Fuxi, Shenrong, and Wangdi are the main characters that we kind of worry about in Chinese medicine. especially canonical Chinese medicine. Fuxi, the Yin Yang Fei Fei school. So, the story of Fuxi is that, he kind of made these two diagrams, the He Tu and the Lo Shu diagrams, right? Because he was, he had like these visions about how yin yang five phase kind of stuff worked, right? Then that's kind of like not medicine per se, that's more like shamanism. Then we look to the Shen Nong lineage as being, again, this is like the fire expression of the emperor, because this is when those ideas then became applied in almost everything, right? And so in the Shen Nong lineage, this is when it gets applied essentially to like farming, right? And then to herbs, right? So the Shen Nong lineage, this is more of a medical lineage. This is like the herbal lineage. And then the Wang Di lineage is when, like the Wang Di Neijing is when they kind of, apply it to like, real intense theories. Like Shen Nong is just a guy picking herbs out of the ground and chewing on them. So not super theoretical, just like kind of tasting herbs, classifying them, stuff like that. The Wang Di lineage is where you really get the detailed theory of everything. So when you look at today's Chinese medicine, we come primarily from the Shen Nong and the Wang Di lineage, all of us, right? This is like the canon of Chinese medicine. Typically, we look at separating these two out a little bit. The Shen Nong lineage is more like an herbal-based or the Jingfeng kind of medicine. The formulas that we kind of receive from like the Shahunan and Jingui Yale. And then the Wang Di lineage is a little bit more of an acupuncture lineage. Right. And then those are the two main streams of Chinese medicine. Of course, in the West, we kind of combine both of them because most of us are herbalists and acupuncturists. But when we're talking about like the style we practice in like the ICEAM, we're definitely much more like a Shen Nong lineage. We're very practical about our herbs. We're not very super theoretical. We're not like talking about some etheric qi going through the channels and stuff like that. We're very kind of hands-on as far as like our medicine goes. And so these two slides you can take a look at and take a look at those on your own time. But basically the bolded part is the thing I just wanted to say is basically there's all these theories, right? And if you really understand what's going on in Chinese medicine, it says if its principles are confounded, if you go against the principles of Chinese medicine, then curation will turn into aggravation and life will become death. But if you follow these principles, if you really know yin yang, 5 phase, and 6 qi, and know how to apply them, then there's nothing you can't fix, right? And it's kind of the same thing in this is the Jingfeng saying from the early Han annals, again, talking essentially about the same thing. If you can follow the principles, then there's nothing you can't fix, right? But if you go against them, if you're looking in the wrong direction, then you run into problems. And then Zhen Rongxiu's preface here, again, like I'll kind of skip this just for the sake of time. In Zhen Rongxiu's preface, again, like he kind of, and you can read this on your own, but the message of Zhen Rongxiu's preface is he laments like the state of Chinese medicine. He wrote the Shanghunlun to elevate the state of Chinese medicine and to elevate the state of Chinese medicine because nobody was really kind of reading these old books, right? So if we're going to be Jingfeng practitioners, if we're going to be Shanghan Jingwei practitioners, we need to pay attention to the Neijing and the Nanjing and the Tangye Jing. We need to be kind of reading these books, not so much to become scholars, but to understand the principles, to really be able to kind of put into our bodies, into our practice, the principles of yin yang, 5 phase, and 6 qi. Okay. So the next couple slides here, just a couple of slides from the Shennon Bensa Jing. Again, you guys are all already on this page, so I don't need to kind of belabor this point. The Shennon Bensa Jing talks about like there's the highest kind of levels of medicinals, the middle level of medicinals, and lower middle level of medicinals, right? And so you've got like the emperors, you got the ministers, and then you got the assistants and the envoys. And so he says basically these things, they come together, right? And they come together in harmony, and it's suitable for the use of 1 emperor, 2 ministers, 5 assistants or envoys, or you can apply 1 emperor, 3 ministers, and 9 assistants or envoys. Basically saying that not only is this supposed to be kind of decoction based, like we'll see in a second, but also formula based. We don't use individual herbs on purpose. We use groups of herbs. We use formulas because like this is how we can balance things out in our patients, right? So Chinese medicine is a formula-based medicine. It's not an individual herb-based medicine. Even though we're talking about Gui Zhi today as single medicinal and dosing single medicinals, it's something that is in the context of a larger formula, right? And our soup, our decoction, is going to be a group of flavors put together, hopefully harmoniously. right? And then again, this is the main method is water decoction. Zeng Rongxiu says, if one wishes to cure disease, one must first use a decoction to wash and clean the 5 viscera and the 6 bowels, opening and obstructing the vessels, regulating yin and yang, breaking and dispersing evil qi, moistening the dry and withered, beautifying the person's skin and benefiting their qi and blood. Water can clean the 10,000 things, and as such, a decoction is used. And decoction is premier, right? So definitely the thing that we kind of focus on most. All right. And so flavor is like the main thing that we want to focus on. It's not like that flavor only. Definitely temperature is going to be important when we're thinking about herbs. Also, the signature of the herbs, what herbs look like, is going to be pretty important. But flavor is very important because flavor is what causes the changes in our physiology, right? And so when we use herbs that are acrid, they're going to do different things in our body than when we use herbs that are bitter or salty. And when we're thinking, our methodology in ICEAM is to adhere closely to understanding flavor, temperature, and signature of herbs. It's not about like, oh, Bensky said, right? Or it's not about, oh, I've read this in the Shenam Bensal Jing. An herb does what an herb does because it's got a flavor, a temperature, and a signature, right? And so in the Neijing, this phrase or this paragraph we already kind of know, respectively, pungent, sour, sweet, bitter, and salty each possess their respective benefits. And again, like pungent or acrid can disperse, sour can astringe, sweet can moderate, bitter can tighten firm, and then salty can soften, right? And those are the main flavors. Those are the things that give the actions to formulas. Again, our methodology would be is not to kind of like reflect on an herb and what it can do because Bensky said it, right? We reflect on what an herb can do because it's got a particular flavor, right? And that flavor profile is what we're either going to dial up or dial down in our soups to get the therapeutic response that we want. The other thing to think about is that, which again, if you guys have been doing any kind of Jing Feng for a while, you kind of are already starting to understand this. It's definitely something that's been out and talked about for a while now. Definitely was new when I first started. But that the 5 flavors that you learned back in TCM school, like for instance, sour doesn't go to wood, right? The sour doesn't kind of benefit wood like you kind of had this vague idea when you were back in school. Sour has very specific actions on the 5 phases, and that's enumerated in the Neijing in chapter 22. Right? So this paragraph and the next paragraph on these 2 slides kind of talks a little bit about like the function of each of those flavors. And again, a long lecture, I'm not going to have time to kind of go through that today, but I'll focus a little bit on the flavor of the medicinal that we're going to talk about, which is cinnamon, right? So cinnamon's flavor is acrid. So I know Bensky also says it's sweet, but again, that's a later addition to like the knowledge of like how cinnamon worked. Back in the Han Dynasty, when Zeng Rongxiu was using cinnamon, it was considered to be acrid. And it was considered to be acrid because it was a medicinal. Acrid has 3 functions. Acrid can tonify wood, right? Acrid could purge metal, and acrid can moisturize water. And of those 3 things, cinnamon twig focuses primarily on activating or tonifying wood. Now, what does that mean to tonify wood? When we talk about tonification, we talk about a flavor like acrid. It's not like tonification, a materialistic adding of something into the body. It's a functional change. In other words, acrid can dial up wood function, whereas like sour can dial down wood function, right? Wood is supposed to circulate. Wood is supposed to move and disperse through the body. That's the nature of wood. And if you're having not enough wood function, if you're not having good enough circulation, then you will swallow acrid. Acrid will help turn up that wood function and get the circulation in the body to happen better. And so in particular then, acrid Gui Zhi is going to tonify wood. That means activate the dispersing function. And in particular, because it's red, it's going to go to the bloodstream. So Gui Zhi acrid is going to help to circulate blood around the body. And then because cinnamon twig is also warm, it's going to warm blood. So the main function of Gui Zhi is going to tonify wood to warm and circulate the blood in the body. This is what's going to make it a premier Taiyang herb, for instance, because when we treat Taiyang disease, we want to get good blood flow out to the surface so we can release the surface, so we can break a sweat. This is why cinnamon twig is going to be premier medicinal to treat like sinew pain, right? To pain in your tendons and ligaments, because it's going to warm the blood and circulate the blood and drive it deep into your sinews to help repair the damage that's happened there, right? So first function of cinnamon is going to be to tonify wood, to warm and circulate the blood. And then because when you tonify wood, you also benefit fire, right? Because wood tonifies fire. Cinnamon twig is also going to then tonify wood to build imperial fire, to strengthen the contractility of the heart, to help the heart beat stronger and smoother, to kind of give it a better rhythm. Right? So acrid cinnamon is going to tonify wood, put the warmth in the blood. Acrid Gui Zhi is going to tonify wood and build that imperial fire to improve the heart function. Right? And that's an important thought process when we kind of go and we start looking at formulas and we're looking at strategies, right? So we have to know, like, you know, how does this flavor work in the body? How is it? It's not just because Bensky said something, right? It's because it works on a particular kind of phase in the body, works on the wood phase, wood and fire phase. Gui Zhi works because it's an acrid herb that tonifies wood and builds fire. Right. In so doing, then, because it warms the blood, and because Taiyang is the confirmation that's more blood and less qi, in other words, Taiyang function is dependent on blood function, then Gui Zhi is going to be a premier Taiyang medicinal as well. Right. And so Gui Zhi works in these domains because of its flavor, because of its temperature, and because of its signature. Right? And as we think through herbs, and then, you know, as we think through all the different herbs and dosages of herbs, we're always thinking based on that methodology, right? Understanding flavors, understanding where they go, understanding how that kind of can change body function. All right, and then there you can see, like, this is like from the Tang Jing. This is where we kind of, you know, start thinking about like how Gui Zhi cinnamon twig works on the wood phase. It says in that first bullet, all pungent or all acrid belongs to wood, and it's governed by Gui Zhi. Shu Jiao is fire, Jiang is earth, Xixin is metal, and Fuzi is water. Those are 5 acrid herbs. All 5 of those acrid herbs are going to tonify the wood phase, in other words, promote circulation. And they're going to work through their own respective kinds of temperature and signature. In other words, like Xixin goes to lungs because it's got leaves, right? Because leaves are like the signature of the lungs. And again, like, this is one of those lectures that if you come and you study it in ICEAM, we've got a whole 2-day seminar on just the 5 flavors, talking about the 5 flavors, the benefits of the 5 flavors, the detriments of the 5 flavors, and how they work in the human body. Okay. And so then dosage is the secret that's never taught, you know, famous Chinese saying, right? You know, you want to know how to do something. There's always one little bit that you know, your famous Chinese doctor kind of holds back, doesn't tell you, right? And dosage is definitely one of those things. Pulse diagnosis, maybe another one of those things. But dosage is definitely one of those things. And it's because dosage is so critical to getting like a good result in your patient. Oftentimes that's a secret that's reserved for only like the, you know, the indoor students, right? For the people that, you know, aren't going to compete with the teacher, that aren't going to take over and you know, run that teacher out of business. And so when we look then at formulas, we want to pay very close attention to the dosages that are in like the, particularly in the Shanghai and Jingwei. But then also kind of look at our teachers and how our teachers dose particular medicinals, and get an idea of like, this is from their own experience of like how to kind of actually, you know, take what you learn, let's say from Jiang Jing, and then start to apply it in a very kind of systematic way, in a very practical way in your clinic for your patients. Right? Changing the flavor of soup changes its function, right? You can increase or decrease dosage to kind of change the flavor function in your formula, but you can also subtract or add flavors, jiawei, to your formula to kind of accentuate or de-accentuate certain flavors in your formula, right? Obviously, today we're going to just talk about like increasing or decreasing dosage, but all these systematic ways of modifying formulas, this again is something that we'll talk about in ICEAM. There's again like a whole weekend talking about systematic modifications of formulas, so you can learn very precisely how to control flavors in and out, flavors in terms of dosage, so that you can get the results that you want with your patients. And again, you know, when we look at the Shandong Bensao Jing, the entry for Gui Zhi, it says Gui Zhi is of acrid, it's warm in temperature, and this is from the Tang Jing, it's the wood herb of the word circle. It governs the treatment of ascending qi, cough, rebellion, knotted qi, throat obstruction during inhalation and exhalation. It benefits the joints and it tonifies the center and benefits the qi. So each of these functions comes either because of a particular dose of cinnamon. So for instance, like to treat like that ascending qi, you need a particularly high dose of cinnamon to get that to work. It's not just you chuck some cinnamon into your formula and you're gonna, fix somebody's like palpitations or running piglet. You have to know precisely what dosages do that, right? It's got to be a 12 or a 15 or possibly even an 18-gram dose of cinnamon to actually get that effect, right? If you want to benefit the joints, again, it's not a 9-gram dose of Gui Zhi like we see in Gui Zhi Tang. 12 grams of Gui Zhi is required to fix somebody's joint pain. And so on and so on. Like that's the only way that you can kind of figure out how to kind of change the function and get some of these, or change the activity of Gui Zhi in your formula to achieve some of these functions for your patients. Some of these also kind of go with certain herb combinations, which again is not something that we'll talk about particularly here. But again, herb combinations is something that we go over many different weekends in the ICEAM program, so that you can understand like those Duya pairs or like the triplets of herbs and how to accurately prescribe those and adjust those both in terms of dosage and in pairings, so that you can achieve like the effects that you want for your patient. Okay, so let's get to like the dosages here. So Bensky, this is also one of those things I remember, finishing up TCM school, and I'm sure a lot of you guys had like the same experience when you were in school. Is like, you're writing your formulas. Again, I was taught to like just write my own formulas, create a new formula for every patient that came in. You were such a loser if you kind of only used like the regular formulas. You just like, that's an idiot thing to do. You got to write your own. So I spent all my time in clinic when I was in, stupidly when I was in school, writing my own formulas, creating my own formulas. And so then, but the thing was, is like, well, I want to use whatever Gui Zhi in my formula. How much do I use? Well, Bensky says 3 to 15. Okay, like which one? Like how much? The only argument I ever got, I'm a pretty reasonable person, I think. The only argument I ever got with a supervisor when I was in school was asking a very specific question about dosages, like, exactly how much should I use? And they just didn't want to tell me, right? And I don't know whether it's because they didn't know or because it was some secret. And it was the most frustrating thing ever. And I think most people get out of school and they don't know that like certain dosages mean certain things, right? Because Bensky just says 3 to 15. Like, okay, like, just how I feel today, today I feel like 6. Tomorrow I feel like 12, like that's not good enough, right? It's not going to be good enough for your patients. It's definitely not going to be good enough to get results. When we look at Zhang Wenjing's text, he has a dosage range between 3 and 18 grams in his formulas, but they're very specific for particular conditions. Like, so in other words, 3 grams only happens in certain formulas when he's trying to achieve certain things, whereas 18 happens in a formula when it's a much different condition, much different problem, and you need to use that kind of dosage in that formula to get that kind of result, right? And then from a more practical, everyday usage thing in the Tianzeng lineage, we use between 3 and 60 grams of, and probably even higher, but I only really have record of 60 grams. I mean, I'd have to say I've seen my teacher use up to 90. I've heard talk of using up to 100 in terms of grams of Gui Zhi in a formula. But 3 to 60 is like what I have kind of case records for, right? And again, this comes from, revering the classics, looking at the classics, applying the classics in your practice, and then kind of making adjustments based on experience. And so certainly from our experience, like, 3 is the low ball end of that dosage range, but up to 60 grams is a very important dosage range to kind of have in mind, because there are certain conditions that will only respond to 60 grams. So for instance, I'll show a case today where I use 60 grams, actually 2 cases. One case where I use 60 grams to treat a very serious arrhythmia in the heart. And having known this, earlier in my career, I was not able to write that prescription because I didn't really understand that dosage range. Understanding that dosage range gave me like the ability to kind of write a formula that really fixed somebody's serious arrhythmia in the heart. So when we look at Gui Zhi at 3 grams, Gui Zhi at 3 grams is really just a very mild dose. It's not like the main player in the formula. Certainly not an emperor dose for Gui Zhi in a formula. If you see a dose of Gui Zhi in a formula of 3, remember acrid Gui Zhi is going to tonify wood and build fire. So essentially we're going to stoke the imperial fire to support the heart yang, but we're not even really doing very much with blood circulation at this dose. It's just too weak of a dose to do that. So essentially a dose of 3 grams of cinnamon is to kind of support heart fire, support that imperial fire. And so we look at formulas like Zhi by Gui Zhi Tang, which is essentially a phlegm formula, to kind of get this kind of chest obstruction, this pain in your chest, to drive out the phlegm and the qi that's stuck in your chest. And because it's stuck in your chest, the idea is that you want to use a little bit of cinnamon just to support the heart yang so that you can drive it out. Right, but very much a secondary player at that dose. Same thing in Wu Mei Wan. Wu Mei Wan is for a lot of wind in the body. There's a heavy dose of Wu Mei in this formula. So you're using a lot of sour to check like the surging of wind, causing the vomiting of roundworms, causing a lot of other problems. The 3 grams of Gui Zhi that we have in that formula is essentially to kind of warm the organs, right? And there's the 5 herbs are in that formula. Each of those 5 acrid herbs is there to kind of warm each one of the Zeng organs to kind of help with like the underlying cause of the wind, but not to treat the wind directly. So again, kind of really gently stoking that imperial fire in the background as you're trying to kind of treat some other kind of problem. When we see a dose of 6 grams of Gui Zhi, we're starting to look at a little bit more like, okay, like it's starting to take a little bit more charge in the formula. Again, even though it's 6 grams, it's still very much not the main player yet. It's still a little bit in the background. So we look at formulas that 6 grams can mobilize that imperial fire now. Now we're actually going to start to warm the blood and circulate the blood. One of the ways you kind of do that is to kind of send that blood out to the surface. When warm blood goes to the surface, you can then kind of like boil the fluids a little bit so that you can make a sweat. Right? Typically, we see 6 grams of Gui Zhi when it's partnered with Ma Huang for that that kind of particular kind of condition, because again, the problem, the yang hasn't really been damaged yet. You haven't really sweated, so you haven't damaged your yang. So you're just going to support circulation to the surface. So when Ma Huang opens the pores, you can make a nice sweat and release the surface. You can also mobilize that imperial fire to kind of warm the small intestine. Remember, the small intestine is also imperial fire, not just the heart. When you have fluid accumulation in your body, particularly water accumulation in the lower, you can use 6 grams of cinnamon to, again, warm the small intestine. When that small intestine is warmed, then it can kind of put some warmth in the urinary bladder, and it can help release the fluids that are trapped in the lower, right? Wuling San patterns are patterns of cold contraction and closure of the urinary bladder. Right, that's why you get a little bit of, oh, I can't pee. This is typically like your initial onset urinary tract infection. You're kind of like, oh, I feel a little uncomfortable. And so to give Wuling San then will warm and relax that bladder and allow like that bladder to empty. Right, and then Fuling Gui Zhi tongue is another example of a formula with 6 grams. When we look at, Gui Zhi of 9, now we're actually working to kind of restore the yang a little bit more. The Wei Qi in particular has been damaged here. The blood also is starting to cool off a little too much. And so we're going to really strengthen the imperial fire with 9 grams. To warm the blood, we can repair the Wei Qi at the surface, and formulas, let's say, like Gui Zhi Tang. We can warm and restore normal function to blood, like Dangui Sini Tang. Right? Or it can we more strongly activate the small intestine to actually metabolize fluids rather than just like kind of discharge the fluids like we see in Wuling San. Formulas like Lingui Jugan Tang, now you're starting to actually metabolize those fluids that have lingered in the body. When we get to 12 grams, again, like this increase of dose is going to further stoke the imperial fire. And now we've got enough warmth and enough imperial fire that we can start to treat a little bit more serious pathologies, let's say to the heart. So 12 grams of cinnamon twig is going to help to restore the heart yang and treat like the tendency to get palpitations. Now, this is just that sense of fluttering, or maybe a little, yeah, actually just even that sense of fluttering. This isn't like arrhythmias. This isn't like tachycardia just yet, right? This is just like, okay, the heart's starting to actually do a thing that's uncomfortable. Right, you can use 12 grams to kind of restore that heart yang. We can also treat it to kind of prevent the starting of an upsurge, right? So that when we talk about running piglet oftentimes is a problem of anxiety, right? It's that feeling of like, you know, it's in your throat, your heart's in your throat kind of thing, that feeling of surging up, kind of making you feel panicky. A dose of 12 grams is able to kind of prevent that from happening. Right, we see that in Lingui Cao Cao Tang, palpitations below the umbilicus about to surge up, about to become running piglet. Not yet, but about, right? If you actually want to treat that anxiety, you're going to have to go higher, and we'll see that in the next slide. You can also then strengthen that blood circulation to get into the sinews. You know, if you have pains, joint pains, again, 9 grams, 6 grams, not enough cinnamon. You need at least 12 grams to treat joint pain. Right, and we see that in the formula of Gui Zhi Futsitang, for instance. Cinnamon in Gui Zhi Futsitang is really warming the blood and driving it into your sinews to treat the pain. And then finally, when we see 15 grams or 18 grams, now we're really treating a very weak imperial fire. So much so that you have a lot of surging up, causing things like, again, anxiety, causing things like palpitations or arrhythmias, causing things like insomnia, mental unrest. And we see 15 grams in Gui Zhi Guitang, again, another running piglet formula. And we see greater in 18 grams in the formula Tianqiong-san, which is a taxation formula, which treats, again, insomnia, mental unrest, really vivid dreams, all that stuff also leading to taxation. And that's like kind of Zeng Rongxiu's dosage range. Then from a practical kind of day-to-day purpose, we see 30, 45, and 60 grams, at least in my own practice, when we see very serious pathologies of heart-yang, right? Much more arrhythmias, tachycardias, even things like kind of, people who are recovering from myocardial infarction. You're going to need a very significant dose of Gui Zhi to treat those kinds of conditions. All right. Before I dive into the cases, any questions? Shay asks, are Rogue and Gui Zhi very different, or is the overlap good enough to use them interchangeably? So, there's a bit of a, Dr. Huang is kind of famous for saying that, like, oh, it's not cinnamon twig, it's actually Rogue. And again, I'm not a sinologist. I don't really have a dog in that fight. I would just have to say that I use cinnamon twig for everything, and it works awesome. I don't have any real clinical experience with Rogue, so I don't have good practical advice for you. And like, for me, that means everything, right? If I didn't see my teacher use it, I didn't see my teacher's teacher use it, I didn't see my great-grandteacher use it, and I haven't used it. All I have is what you and I both know from the textbooks, right? Bensky said, which in my experience is very kind of not worth much. You have to play with it to see. So I don't know. You can play with it and see. I do know for sure, 100%, that cinnamon twig treats everything like that. Yeah, so a good question, Susan. Yeah, they do seem a little bit like they are a little bit conflicting. And I would have to say the reason I don't see a conflict in that is because all the reasoning you can, when I look at Dr. Zeng, not Dr. Zeng, Dr. Tian's case studies, and I've got a bunch of them that I've kind of gone through, his reasoning from the classics is impeccable. So whatever he kind of figured out in terms of modern dosing, it came from, he practiced for like, 30 or 40 years, only doing classical dosages, right? And then as he developed a little bit more experience, he's like, okay, like I see where I've got to kind of like push things a little bit. I see where I have to kind of change things a little bit. So for instance, like, if you look at some of the classical dosages of Longu Muli, they're like 6 grams each, right? 9 grams, I think, is the highest it goes, let's say like in Gui Zhi Longu Muli Tong or something like that. And one of the things that, we've kind of figured out from practice, we see from our teachers, is that like, that's just way too little. And maybe it's because we don't really use like the fossilized dinosaur bones anymore. Maybe it's because they just bury carcasses in the backyard, for like, 3 years and then dig it up and use it. Maybe it's because it's like, hasn't been buried for like 100 years. Maybe a cow bone would be great if it was buried for a long period of time. It's hard to really know some of those things like that. And so from experience, like some dosages have to change. Again, we still kind of rely on the classics to kind of really build our foundation. And then from there, we kind of start to take liberties. It's the same thing kind of like with modifications. Like Dr. Tian would always say, like for the first 3 years or 2 years, like whatever it was, like you can only practice with formulas with no modifications, right? Even though our system, we have plenty of, Zeng Rongxiu has modifications, right? The reason being is that like if we don't build that base first, it's very hard to know when to modify. Right? If you don't work for like 10 years using kind of like standard formulas with standard dosages and all those kinds of things, it's very hard to know when I need 60 grams of cinnamon, right? It's very hard to be able to tell that. So we start there, right? And then the longer we're in practice and the more we kind of feel we can kind of accept some like additional kinds of information from our teachers, then we can start to make other decisions we see in clinic. I don't know if that answers your question, Susan. Okay. Other questions? Okay, well then, like let's look at this first case here. This is a 64-year-old woman with a rectal adenoma that was resected. It was benign, but she had been having, one of the reasons she went in the first place is she was having like this liquid, watery bowel movements 3 to 4 times a day. That's how they found the adenoma. So they went in and they resected it, but even afterwards, she was still having watery diarrhea afterwards. She came to me for treatment, and I did some other things, but essentially the main formula that she was on for a while was Genutong minus Baisha plus Ganjiang, which is a standard modification of Genutong for diarrhea. And she was on that successfully for like many months, doing very well. Then she came to me one day and she was like, okay, something's happening, it's not working. She was starting to have water coming out of her rectum at night when she was sleeping, and she was having more frequent, it wasn't quite as bad as it had been, but more frequent watery bowel movements. So her pulse, then I took her pulse, like you can read that pulse, I'm not going to read it to you. And I put her on Wuling San. And the reason I did this is because my diagnosis was, in terms of the way we see things in clinic, one of our ways of thinking about things in clinic is that if somebody is, certainly if somebody's doing well, but anytime somebody has an abrupt change in a condition, one of the first things that we think of is exterior contraction. Whether or not they get fever, chills, body aches, all that, all 9 yards, it doesn't really matter. Like that initial, that abrupt change is what clues us in that there's some sort of external contraction. Wind or cold destabilized the body, and then because she wasn't able to handle it, then she received damage. So in her case, she got a little bit of a contraction in her bowel. After, when I felt her pulses, I asked her a question. She's like, oh yeah, I do have a little bit of inhibited urination. So I switched her to Wuling San. Again, no fruits in that formula. She was on a bunch of fruits. No ganjiang in that formula. She was on a bunch of ganjiang. It was just a Gui Zhi Fuling, Juling, the ingredients of Wuling San. 6 grams of Gui Zhi. And then after 2 weeks on Wuling San, her diarrhea was 80% better. All of her symptoms were 80% better. So I refilled it in another couple of weeks. All of her problems were gone. Right. So in this case, what she needed is like that whatever external contraction happened had caused a little bit of a cold contraction in her bladder. Then she was backing up with fluids in her lower jiao. And those fluids then were kind of seeping out through her rectum, right? She was getting watery bowel movements, and she was having inhibited urination on the front, through her urinary bladder. And so just a simple formula then was able to kind of repair that damage to the small intestine urinary bladder. Right. And then her bowel movements then went back to being kind of more of a normal bowel movement. And she hasn't come back yet. I don't know. I haven't really changed her formula back to anything because she's still kind of in process here. But like that's one way to think about like using cinnamon, is a way to kind of just mobilize that yang out to, in this case, the small intestine, to warm the bladder so the bladder can release and fluid balance can be restored. Steve has a question. If using granules 16 per day, how would you manage the higher dosage of Gui Zhi such as 60? Good question. This is always a problem when you're doing granules, right? So one of the issues that you have with bulk formulas, if you write them 14 herbs and there's 20 grams of this and 40 grams of that or whatever, like they take that all in one day, right? They get all of that in one day. And then, 5 days later, whatever, they're done with their herbs, taking that once a day for 5 days. With granules, the more herbs you put in, if you're kind of only doing a 16 gram a day dosage, the ratios are good, but what happens is the actual amount of herb that they're getting kind of isn't really the same. That's an artifact of granules. I would say what happens is that you just, and I don't know how you practice, Steve, whether you do granules or bulk or both, but because I do all granules, I'm familiar with like how I have to dose things in granules to get results. If you made me switch today to all bulk formulas, it would take me a couple of weeks to get my sea legs, right? To kind of figure out, okay, like I've been doing granules for so long, how is this actually going to work out in bulk prescriptions? Just because like the effective dosage you get per day is going to change a little bit. And again, like it's really just an artifact, like I said, of granules. And these formulas that these cases I'm telling you about, these are all granule-based formulas. If they were bulk, maybe I would be dosing slightly different just because, it's bulk. I don't know if that helped. But definitely I kind of stick to, I sometimes will, if I write a bigger formula, I sometimes get, them taking like 18 grams a day or 24 grams a day or something like that, depending. But generally speaking, everybody kind of gets good results taking about 16. I mean, my teacher does 15 grams a day. I do 16 grams a day, whatever. It's good enough. And we get good results with pretty serious conditions. Like, it's not like it's, you know, we're just giving herbs and they're kind of not seeing any changes. They're seeing changes in, relatively speaking, a short period of time. Okay. Does that answer your question, Steve? I don't know if. Any questions about that first case? Let's see the second one here. This one is an example of using 9 grams of Gui Zhi, where we kind of are working to kind of restore or repair like the Wei Qi that someone has, right? And so chief complaint, this 31-year-old man complains of frequent infections. Every few weeks he gets sick and has to take off from work. He gets fever, chills, body aches, swollen glands, sore throat. We also get nasal congestion with green nasal discharge. He runs colder than normal. No obvious sweating even when sick with a fever. And that should have been my clue there, but it was not my first visit, unfortunately. He also complains of fungal rashes on his body and his feet, and he has kidney stones that occur every 2 years. Always thirsty. He has seasonal allergies. And so, you know, my training, I don't know how you guys are trained to think about things in clinic, but anytime I hear somebody like, I'm, you know, have this thing all the time, I always have this chronic kind of problem, I have this thing that's coming and going, I always think Shaya. You know, so this guy came in and he definitely had some wiry in his left-hand guan. Again, although I was maybe not paying quite close enough attention to like that right-hand sun. And so I kind of was, you know, maybe a little bit too much automatic pilot and wrote him a Chai Gui Zhi Tong modified, as you can see there, to treat his green, thick sinus congestion, this kind of chronic getting ill. And the follow-up later, after 2 weeks, his Chai Gui Zhi Tong didn't do anything. As a matter of fact, he got sick again. So for me in practice, and you know, for almost all my colleagues in ICEM, 2 weeks you should see changes. They may not be completely cured in 2 weeks with whatever kind of crazy illness that they've got, but you should see some changes in 2 weeks. And so it's not like we're not waiting months, we're not waiting years to see changes in their condition. They should be feeling better in 2 weeks. Now, again, they may still need the same formula, or they may still not have everything fixed, but you should get some positive thumbs up feedback after 2 weeks. So if this guy comes back in 2 weeks and he's like, nope, got sick again, I'm like, this is the wrong formula. So went back, felt the pulses, kind of checked my previous notes. I'm like, oop, I missed that one. And switched the formula to Xiao Long Tong, modified as you see there. And that did the trick. So after 2 weeks on Xiao Long Tong, he was feeling about 50% better and no new illnesses. Because his pulses hadn't changed, I refilled the formula. After another 5 weeks on the Xiao Long Tong, he reports no new illness, energy's better, no allergies or sinus and congestion or postnasal drip. He even didn't have the herbs for a week because he was traveling. And so he, because he was feeling better, I couldn't feel his pulses because he was traveling. So I refilled the Xiao Long Tong for another month. And last report I had, he was, you know, he hasn't gotten sick again. And so in this case, using, I mean, again, Gui Zhi Tong is the standard, but if you look at your Xiao Long Tong, your Xiao Long Tong has Gui Zhi Tong in it. You know, it's Gui Zhi Baixia, doesn't have Shengjiang, it has Ganjiang, right? You take the dots out because they got a snot in their nose plus Gansao. So it's a Gui Zhi Tong structure. And that's the structure that we use to kind of repair that yin and wei at the surface, right? And so in this case, the Xiao Long Tong was able to repair his Wei Qi. The Ma Huang in the formula, again, was able to kind of keep the pores open enough. Chai Hu wasn't strong enough to open the pores. We needed Ma Huang to open the pores, right? And then the modifications helped, you know, clear up whatever kind of mucus that he had, right? And that would be, again, like using a 9-gram dose of Gui Zhi to kind of help work on some of that stuff. Okay, any questions about that case? That was a super interesting case. I like that case. There's a couple of reasons I like that case. There's a tendency, again, in our group in ICM, and I think kind of like as Shanghang practitioners in general, but when we see sore throat, we think Shaiyang. You know, sore throat, dry throat is because that flare of ministerial fire that you get in Shaiyang, which kind of causes that coming and going of fever and chills, hot and cold. That flaring of fire can really dry out the throat and make it a little bit sore. And so patients that have green mucus, that's Shaiyang. Patients that have sore throat, that's Shaiyang. You know, we kind of, you know, that's a pretty normal prescription to write. When it doesn't work, it can be a bit of a problem. You're kind of like, what? Wait a second, you're on Chai Hu and you got a sore throat. What? And this is one of the moments too, where again, like going back and reading the text and paying close attention to what the Shanghanlun says. There's a couple of sections in the Shanghanlun 3 lines that are in there. They talk about this wind strike onto Yang Ming. And wind strike onto Yang Ming can lead you to have certain like Shaiyang-like symptoms. To get symptoms like a sore throat or to get like ear congestion and or deafness or whatever is in that line, you know, and it looks like a Shaiyang problem. But again, like in this case, because the pulse isn't right for it, because like again, that right hand sun was a little bit more wiry tight than it should have been for somebody on a Chai Hu. That's then we're kind of like, oh, okay, like maybe this is like some sort of this wind strike or this, you know, cold onto the surface caused a flare of fire that was a more of like a Yang Ming / Tai Yin kind of problem than it was a Shaiyang kind of problem, right? And so in this case, because he had a little bit of mild sweat, because he had a tendency to be a little bit more deficient, I use Xiao Qing Long Tong. You could use formulas like Da Qing Long Tong, that's a possibility. I've used Xiao Shen Shong Tong as well for wind strike onto Yang Ming. Those are all possibilities for that kind of problem. And so that method for me also is something I learned from the text, from my teachers actually seeing Dr. Zeng's cases. He has a very famous case of treating mumps with Da Qing Long Tong. It's kind of an amazing case. Where the person gets a bunch of swelling around their ears, right? You know, in the parotid glands and stuff like that. And he uses Da Qing Long Tong to treat that. That's kind of an amazing thing to me. So I learned that from him, but then also going back into the text and reading the text and then seeing some other cases from Dr. Tien and New Light, and they're like, oh, okay, like that's why he did that. And that's why, you know, he recorded that pulse is because he was seeing this as being like that kind of problem. And so I like this case because it's like that. Also, I like this case because I did the job. It was successful, right? We always love our successes, right? So like that was good. That was a good case. Any questions about this one? Right, let's go to the next one. This is a super interesting case. One of the reasons this is an interesting case, this goes to like the thing I was talking about at the beginning. You know, I mentioned the case of like the testicular cancer, and Dr. Zeng had given the guy Li Zhongwan, and like, that's not an anti-cancer formula, what are you doing? It's because it matched their pattern, right? It matched their condition, like that's why. Now, some of you guys may be treating cancer, I don't know, but a lot of us treat fertility patients, right? A lot of us are gonna see patients who are like, you know, going through IVF, trying to get pregnant, trying to do this, that, and the other thing. And inevitably, especially when I teach at I always call it PCOM because that's what, you know, what it's been so for long, whatever peaches they call it now. Whenever I teach students, inevitably people are like, okay, but you know, like what's the fertility herb? What's the herb to help a woman, you know, get pregnant, right? Because I see a lot of that. I want to treat that. And the answer is like, you know, for me, right? If you heard me lecture ever, like I'm like a broken record, there is no fertility herb. There's only what your body needs, right? So for instance, like Da Cheng Qi, in other words, like taking a great poop, that might be your fertility formula. It might be exactly the formula you need, right, to get pregnant, right? Just take a nice dump, right? And then you'll get pregnant, right? Or I remember I had a student who, a guy came in for low sperm count. And she's like, I don't know what to do. So I felt his pulses and I wrote him Chai Hu Gui Zhi Ganjiang Tang. And in 1 month, his sperm count went from like almost nothing to full on sperm, ready to go, right? Why? Because like that was his fertility formula. Right? No particular fertility. There was no Shen Mao in there. There was no like, you know, herbs for the testicles or anything like that. Right? Just treat his pattern. Right? So this is a case example of that as well. This is also going to be a case example where we use like a higher dose of cinnamon for that intense upsurge, in this case, causing really intense anxiety, which, you know, if you've ever treated a bunch of fertility patients, you kind of know like that's kind of par for the course. Most of your fertility patients are anxiety patients, right? Because they're just super anxious about getting pregnant, having a kid. And so this is a 41-year-old female, came to the clinic complaining of infertility. She'd been unable to conceive for 5 years, recently tried IVF. She was able to retrieve 11 eggs, of which only 3 fertilized, 1 survived, and it'll be genetically tested. 28-day cycle, bleeds for 3 to 5 days, no pain in the cycle, no blood diet. It's, you know, pretty unremarkable kind of period. Generally good cervical mucus during ovulation, and she really underplayed during our first visit. Some anxiety, right? I have some anxiety. Her pulses showed something quite different, however. Her pulses were very, like they were surging up. It's like both sun positions were very big and floating and rolled up, and they were very, very kind of, all the pulses showed a bunch of upsurge in her system. So I wrote her the formula Gui Zhi Jonitan, which is a fear and fright formula. And I dosed cinnamon at 18 because, again, cinnamon at 18, like that treats upsurge, right? And so after, you know, she had. Hello? Heard someone kind of talking there.
No, he just joined us and he wasn't on mute, that's all.
Oh, okay. Biopsy of the embryo failed, and she'll try to get IVF again in 2 to 3 weeks. So her embryo was no good, so they're going to have to go through it again. Again, she was reporting this time that she had a burning feeling in her mouth, the tip of her tongue and throat, which she attributed to the herb. She said after she took the formula, she kind of felt that. I was like, oh, like that's interesting, because that would be kind of like a typical fruits kind of side effect, which shouldn't be happening, particularly with the aconite that I have that I use in terms of sourcing it. Like it's very high quality aconite. You don't see that side effect with that kind of high quality aconite. So I was like, but maybe this was the wrong formula. So I rechecked her pulses. I was like, well, both sun kind of floating big, rolling up strong. That could be a Lingui Cao Cao Tang. So I wrote it. I wrote Lingui Cao Cao Tang, and I had just been studying with my teacher about like dosing and lineage style dosing, where we kind of dose like Gui Zhi up to like about 60 grams. So I did it. I was like, well, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So I wrote Lingui Cao Cao Tang with Gui Zhi at 60. She came back for her next follow-up. She was feeling more energetic, had less anxiety. Her sleep was much better, no dizziness, and her cycle should start today or tomorrow, and he had her IVF scheduled. So because her pulses didn't change, I refilled the Lingui Cao Cao Tang. And then the next follow-up, which I think was like a week or 2 later, she was pregnant. And so Lingui Cao Cao Tang, her anti-anxiety formula, was her pregnancy formula. Again, nary a fertility herb, no dongui in that formula, no baishao in that form, nothing like, you know, you might see, you know, no liu wei di wang wang for her. And why? Because again, like it's not about like, oh, I want to choose a herb or a formula for the function, you know, because Bensky said, not because of that, it's because like we prescribe based on her pulses, based on her symptoms, right? And you will get the best results doing that. Question was, Susan asked, what was the first formula I gave her? The first formula, we kind of Gui Zhi Joni, that's the abbreviated, but this formula is really the long name for it. Gui Zhi Chu Xiao Yao Jia Shu Qi Hu Li Joni Tang. Oops. Uh-oh. Autocorrect. Hold on a second. It's autocorrecting me here. That's the full name of it. And that's a formula that's both in the Shanghenlun and the Jingui Yaolai. It's a fear and fright formula.
Oh, Stephen, would you be able to put it onto everyone?
Oops, sorry, I just sent it to Jasmine only. Sorry about that. Jasmine, the lucky one. Sorry. There we go. That's the long. Gui Zhi Chu Xiao Yao Jia Shuqi Longu Muli Joni Tang. Yeah, and that's a fear and fright formula. It's an anxiety formula. Use it quite a bit in clinic. Also a formula that I'll use, like I think we'll see in the next case. I also use it for arrhythmias as well, because when people start getting arrhythmias, if you've ever had AFib or anything like that, it scares you, right? Because your heart's doing weird things, right? And that's a terrifying thing. So a lot of times, again, using formulas that have long gumuli in them when you're treating arrhythmias is also important, just because people are scared. But yeah, a good example of treatment for somebody where it's a condition, again, a condition that we see a lot as practitioners, where we may be thinking, oh, what's a good fertility formula? And again, their best fertility formula is always going to be the formula that matches their pulses and their condition. Had a really interesting one, which is not a Gui Zhi case, but had a really interesting one in the student clinic at Peaches, like 3 terms ago. It was a woman who had kind of all the problems you could have in your uterus. She had like fibroids and endometriosis and PCOS, and she had terrible PMS, and her pain, her menses were extremely painful and clotted, and she hemorrhaged during her cycle, right? Had to, super heavy maxi pads and like would bleed through even though she was doing that. And because of her pulses and because of her complaints, I wrote her a Chaihu formula, no blood regulating at all, just a Chaihu formula. All of her problems got better, 80% better. That next cycle, she didn't bleed through. She had much less pain. It was really quite remarkable. And again, like another testament to kind of like writing formulas that match people's patterns. And you'll see amazing results, right? You'll see such good results. Okay. Other questions about like this case or cases in general? Next one. 39-year-old male complains of bad palpitations. And again, this was a guy who I had been teaching in Australia, and I had already been lecturing for 4 days. I had already done 2 other days of clinic. So in Australia, it's like a different day over there, right? I think you were there, Tracy. And like I was just dog tired. And he waited until like the last day after the last patient in clinic. And he comes up to me, he's like, oh, I'm having some palpitations. I'm like, okay, I'll feel your pulses. And it turns out he doesn't just having palpitations. He was having a very serious arrhythmia that the beta blockers were not able to help him. He was kind of thinking he might do an ablation. He had already been treating himself. He was an herbalist. He had already been treating himself. It wasn't working. I'm like, dude, you waited until I was like so tired. And now, anyway, so his pulses showed a very serious arrhythmia, GMI, so a knotted pulse. Heart and kidney not communicating. So again, a lot of fear and anxiety and stuff like that in his pulses. And so I wrote him Gui Zhi with Gui Zhi to kind of help with some of the blood flow in the heart. And here I also used Gui Zhi 60. And he took that and it got him back in the sinus rhythm. He took that for about a month, and his heart was back in sinus rhythm and hasn't had a problem since. Or if he did have a problem, he kind of just took his formula again and kind of got back into the sinus rhythm. So again, using a very high dose of Gui Zhi to treat serious heart pathology, because again, cinnamon is going to tonify wood. Wood is the thing that stimulates rhythm in the body. Right. So if you're having problems with rhythm, you're having a problem with wood, right? So you need to kind of get the wood going again. And again, because this is the heart, it's not rhythm of your bowels or rhythm somewhere else. This is like a heart rhythm. We're going to use cinnamon twig for those kinds of problems. Right. So Gui Zhi is a premier medicinal to restore normal heart function. Right. And if you're having problems with heart, right, you're going to need then to have a higher dose of cinnamon. So in this case, I use 60 grams. Susan asked, did it give you pause? He denied sweating. No, again, I was asking the sweating because I wanted to know like how badly that yang was floating. It was more of a, so if somebody is having sweating and they're cold, you probably shouldn't give them cinnamon. So this comes from like line 29 and 30 in like the Shahanlan, where somebody they don't have a fever, but they have a lot of sweat. Those cases are aconite problems, right? And so aconite problems, if you're a true Shao Yin aconite kind of case, a cinnamon twig could actually exacerbate your problem, which we see in line 29 and 30. You kind of mess them up because you can wait your time or something like that. So I was asking the sweating and wanted to know, like, were you sweating in cold? Because I want to make sure I didn't, because he was in a bad way, right? His heart was really kind of not functioning well. So I didn't want to kind of exacerbate that. And it turned out he was not having any of that kind of problem. So then I felt safe giving him the cinnamon formula. That was why I did that. Question, Tracy asked, did I minus by shower from Gui Zhi Fulingwan? No, typically what I do when I want to write Gui Zhi Fulingwan was something like, so the reason she asked, because Bai Shao is sour, right? So the core formula to treat arrhythmias, not palpitations, but arrhythmias in the Shahanlan is Gui Zhi Chu Xia Yao Tang. So Gui Zhi Tang minus Bai Shao. Now the formula we all learn when we're in TCM schools, we learn Zhi Gan Sao Tang. And that's also good for arrhythmias, but that's just a modification of Gui Zhi Chu Xia Yao Tang. If you go back and you look at that formula after we're done, you'll see that it's got Gui Zhi, Shengjiang, Dazao, Gansao in it, but no Bai Shao. Right? And this is on purpose, right? The reason we do that is because Bai Shao is sour. Sour flavors can do lots of different things in the body, but particularly one of the things that Bai Shao does is it purges wood. And what do we mean by purging wood? It means it dials it down. You use cinnamon to dial up wood. you can use Baishao to dial down wood, right? When somebody is having a very serious heart pathology, you need to make sure that you're dialing up wood as much as you can, because that's their problem. You need to kind of get that heart phase, that fire stoked again. So if you use Baishao in your formula, you could adversely affect your patient. In other words, you could ruin your results. And I've done this. This is how I learned this. I had a cardiac patient. He had, after having open heart surgery, and he was wanting some herbs. He was still having some issues with his heart. And I had given him a cinnamon formula to begin with. He was doing good. And then I think I put him on a Genwutong, I don't know, something that had Baishao in it. And immediately his heart palpitations came back, kind of worse than they were before. I was like, whoops. Don't do that, right? And my teacher thankfully was there that weekend. I remember we were talking about it. And so he just wrote a formula, took the Baishao out, and then he was pretty much the same formula, I think, and then just took the Baishao out and he was fine again, right? So Baishao is a medicinal because it purges or dials down the wood. It can make it hard to stimulate good heart fire, right? Which is kind of how Baishao works. It's cooling, right? It's kind of like what we use Baishao for in some regards, right? But when you have somebody that has heart pathologies, you have to be careful with Baishao. So that's why Tracy's asking, did I take the Baishao out, right? And what I do in those kinds of cases, actually, Tracy, is I don't take the Baishao, I just swap it for Churshao. Churshao is bitter, Baishao is sour. And so if you use Churshao in that context, generally you don't get that same kind of problem that you would with Baishao, right? Okay. All right. Any other questions about this case or any of the other cases? So one other thing, that I've kind of been alluding to here is, and, haven't really talked too much about, is like, again, the pulses, the way we know that you need cinnamon, right? Yes, your symptoms, but primarily like the pulses, right? What kind of pulse that we feel when we kind of feel the radial pulse on both sides tells us that cinnamon is necessary, is how we're going to then decide, oh, I need 6 or I need 9 or I need 60 or I need whatever dose, right? As far as I can tell, like this is, and other people may do it other ways, like abdominal diagnosis or whatever, but as far as I'm concerned, you need some sort of objective way to assess the system to be able to know that you can do 60 grams of cinnamon safely, right? One of the things we haven't talked about, no one really asked, maybe because it was cinnamon, everyone thinks cinnamon is yummy, it's safe, but all herbs can kill you, right? It doesn't matter what herb you're taking. Yeah, of course, futsa, we're all scared of futsa, right? But dangui can kill you, cinnamon can kill you, all because they're, because herbs essentially are poisonous, right? This is why we put gansao in all of our formulas. Put gansao in all of our formulas because we're trying to make sure we don't drop dead from taking our herbs, right? When we start using heavy doses of herbs, like 60 grams of Gui Zhi or 60 or 90 grams of aconite or something like that, we have to know that it's safe. One of the ways you know it's safe is because, oh, I saw my teacher do it, right? I've seen it done before and they just didn't drop dead. Okay, that's important. But how are you going to know to do it on your own, right? And the only way that I know how to do it on our own is to have some objective tool. And that could be pulse diagnosis, abdominal diagnosis, channel diagnosis. There are lots of ways that people do it. But you have to have some objective tool in order to feel safe writing formulas like this. And in our system of Chinese medicine, in ICEAM canonical Chinese medicine, it's pulse diagnosis. This is kind of like our secret sauce. I mean, dosing, yeah, that's super important. But pulse diagnosis is like the reason we all study with Dr. Versluys, right? Is because when you learn pulse diagnosis, you learn very precise ways to write and modify formulas. When you learn good pulse diagnosis, you will not feel scared about like writing formulas with 60 grams of Gui Zhi or 90 grams of aconite or whatever, 60 grams of gualo or whatever, right? Because you'll feel safe because you'll know how to diagnose based on the pulses. And the pulses will tell you that, look, this is what the body needs, even though they're giving you the story about, I've got testicular cancer, I've got blah, 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 blah. When you're very good at taking the pulses, you're like, yeah, but your pulses tell me Li Zhong. I don't really know why cancer is making Li Zhong happen, but I've done this enough and I know how to feel pulses. I know what a Li Zhong pulse feels like. You get Li Zhong, right? That's how we decide, right? And so this is, if you're thinking about studying with ICM, if you're on the fence, I would say this is the thing for me, at least, that was like, that sold me in terms of like, why I needed to study with ICEAM. And that's because I was so desperate when I got out of school to have some way to figure out what to do in clinic. I've talked about method, reasoning and all that kind of stuff, but all that stuff still is so up in my head, right? I could make anything sound like anything, right? The only way to really know what was going on, what you need to give patients, is some sort of way of cutting through my own chatter in my head that was actually from the patient. That was actually what was going on, right? And in our system, we use pulse diagnosis, right? If you're looking for something like that, right, which I think everybody who does Chinese medicine kind of is, you're looking for some way to be sure, right? How do I know? You really got to give them chai hutang. If you want to be sure, learn something objective, right? Learn abdominal diagnosis, learn channel diagnosis, or in our case, learn pulse diagnosis, right? This is kind of the whole point of ICEAM, is to give you all this theory, all this kind of stuff. It's really not about the theory. It's about how to feel pulses and write good formulas in clinic. And be able to kind of reason, if you make a mistake, like, oh, what do I need to change based on the pulse? What do I need to change? Like you saw in the case with like the Xiaoqing Wang, right? So again, this is the thing. I think if you are on the fence, hopefully like this is the thing that kind of like incentivizes you to kind of come and study with us, is because we teach pulse. We teach very specifically a pulse. All of our learning goes toward learning pulse diagnosis. When we do clinic, we'll tell you what the pulses are. We'll make sure you can feel them. We'll make sure you know that, oh, that this is a Guizhi pulse, this is a Futsu pulse, this is a Dahong pulse, this is whatever. Okay. And the last question here is what sort of pulse indications do you use with Guizhi? I mean, again, they're pretty varied, but the standard pulse for Guizhi is going to be a floating left-hand sun. There's other technical variations of things like that, but essentially a floating left-hand sun, because left-hand sun is where the heart is, right? So that's where you're feeling a cinnamon pulse, is the left-hand sun. Okay. All right. Any other questions? I know we're kind of a couple minutes over here. No? All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Glad you guys all came. Hopefully we'll see you again at our lectures later in the fall. I know I'm coming back in November and doing one. And if I don't see you here, hopefully I'll see you in ICEAM when some of the classes I teach.
Yes. Thank you so much, Stephen, for doing this lecture. It's been really fascinating, especially with the case studies and everything towards the end. It was really, really cool to see that and listen to you. So thank you so much. Yes, so for everybody else, like you could just look out for an email from me. I'll probably be sending it out tomorrow with the recording of the lecture. And I'll also like pop in like Jasmine's info too, if you want to reach out to her and learn more about the program that they have over there at ICEAM. And yeah, hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.